Okay, thank you, thank you. Well, this session starts the program, well, with the previous session on the about the posters, but this is the first session in which we will discuss about the project, and it is it's a pleasure to do it in this beautiful and great auditorium and important institution, and this is thanks to the local organizers. I want to thank them, Victoria and Oliver, to start. And here, luckily, we are nearly all of the participants in UNCHARTED, in the UNCHARTED project, the many partners, most part of the persons that participated in different works in the project, but also most of the advisory board members who collaborate with us very much, and other guests, some colleagues from other projects, sister projects that we appreciate very much that they are here with us, helping to think more about our findings, our conclusions of the work done. I want to thank everybody to be here. So for having this discussion, we need to have it. In this session, the aim is to give you a certain idea of the perspectives that we have been elaborating in the past years in the UNCHARTED project. In the previous session at the posters, you had the opportunity to see more in detail some findings of the many case studies that we have done. But now we will try to elaborate more and to show a more articulated perspective on some fundamental topics for the project that are cultural participation, cultural production and heritage management, and cultural administration. There will be several presentations and several presenters to give you these views, and then there will be time for discussion. So I want to tell you who are the persons that will present. The session, as I said, is organized around these three main perspectives of the project, and we will have, well, first me and Matías Sarlenga from the University of Barcelona will introduce a few ideas about the philosophy, the general orientation of the project, and then we'll go to a presentation about cultural participation. Nancy Duxbury from Coimbra University will do that. And immediately we have selected some special guests for starting the discussion and making some comments. And in this case, we have Susan Jansen from Erasmus University, who is the coordinator of a sister project of us, Invent, who is very much about cultural consumption, cultural participation too, and he will make some comments on this. And we will have some time, short time, 10 minutes, for discussion about this particular perspective. Then we'll go to another of these three, is about cultural production and heritage management, and Paolo Ferri from Bologna University will be in charge of this presentation. And in this case, the discussion will start by a comment by Jordi Alomar, who is not here, I see. is coming. He is coming, who is a musicologist and nearly a sociologist, I would say, and an expert cultural manager and currently director of the Museum of Music in Barcelona. Will make some comments. And then finally, the third component of the session will be about cultural administrations. And in that case, Ole Marius Hieland from Telemark will make the presentation. And we will have an initial comment for discussion of Pau Rausell from the University of Valencia, who is the coordinator of another sister project, MESOC, who is also very much about cultural policy and cultural administrations. So that's the plan. And then at the end, we will have still 30 minutes, I hope, for more general discussion. So I start with this introduction, just a brief points to say that the project develops from a perspective that we construct in a certain interdisciplinary perspective, because we are sociologists, historians, there are some economists in the project too, and there are some humanistic approaches. But one thing that qualifies particularly the project is the perspective about value. It's a pragmatist perspective that inspires the project, and consisting in conceiving values in terms of valuations, of practical valuations of actors, social actors in different areas. We understand that the main aim of the project to understand how the valuation of culture takes place and is established in society, in European societies, is only possible if we take into account and look into the ways that different social actors, cultural actors, evaluate culture and think on and act on culture, evaluating it in different areas. And these are these three fundamental areas of cultural participation, in which citizens are the main actors there, and cultural production, where the presence and the role of professionals and organizations of production and management are predominant, are fundamental, and the third one, cultural administration. There are experts, policymakers, and administrations as organizations that are in charge. This is why this session has been organized in these three parts, because this corresponds to the work that we have done. Next slide, please. Yes, okay. And we have just a quick idea of the path that we have followed. In our work, we have started by looking in a very general perspective, how important factors of change in society in recent decades have changed the ways in which different cultural actors in these different terrains operate, and we have looked at, maybe you have seen in the previous session about Work Package 1, we have selected some particularly important factors of change, doing some examination of literature, etc. Then we have investigated the plural configurations of values in in the everyday action of cultural actors in cultural administrations, in cultural organizations of cultural production, and in cultural participation. So we have looked into how into the emergence of values through valuations of these actors. Then we have analyzed more the mechanism of evaluation, of formal mechanism of evaluation, and how actors negotiate values, contrast values, compare values that they attribute to culture. And in the next phase of the project, next year is the last year of the project, we will concentrate, we will focus more on the strategies of in cultural policy, the strategies of cultural administrations and cultural institutions for using these values that orient their action and to look into how they are more or less effective in doing that. Basically, this is the general lines that define the work that we have done. And now Matthias Sarlenga will give a little bit more details about these phases of the project.
Thank you, Arturo. Thank you all. I will try to summarize what we did in the first work package of the project: work package 1, work package 2, and work package 3. Well, I will start with the work package 1. During the work package 1, we investigate how different factors have influenced the shaping of cultural values in Europe. This work package served us to carry out a first analysis about how the values of culture in Europe are constructed. Working on the base of the research literature available and information about the subject, we examined the influence of a series of circumstances and key factors in shaping these values. For this purpose, we elaborate 5 deliverables that analyze different aspects considered relevant for this constitution, namely gender and rising diversity, urbanization, spatial and social segregation, globalization and digitalization, neoliberalism, and the European historical and political experience of Europe, and a synthesis of a theory. We try to elaborate from that synthesis of a theory, literature, and existing data about these all factors that configure the values of Europe. Through this explorative exercise, we provide a baseline, the first baseline reference for the whole project, and we get a picture of how cultural values are constructed in European society today according to existing knowledge and information. Work package 2 represents a descriptive multiple case study in itself, serving us at the same time as an explorative study for the next work package, the work package 3, which is more theoretical oriented. During the work package 2, we identify a plurality of value that emerge in different cultural spheres. This plurality of value was studied in 4 fundamental arenas of cultural practices: cultural participation in live arts and culture, cultural participation through media, cultural production and heritage management, and cultural administration. During the work package, the work package 2, we bounded at the beginning a case study to be empirical study. Based on this work, we select 26 case studies developed within the 4 research fields of UNCHARTED. 6 case studies in cultural production and heritage management, carried out in Spain, Italy, and Hungary. 4 case study in cultural participation in live arts and culture in France and Portugal, 4 cases in cultural participation through media in the United Kingdom and Norway, and finally, 4 plus 8 cases in cultural administration in Spain, Portugal, and France, United Kingdom, Norway, and Hungary. We try to develop a data collection plan for each case study selected. The data collection plan covered the type of evidence that we expected to achieve, which came from various sources, documents, archival records, interviews, direct observation, participation observation, etc. In this case, we conducted around 220 semi-structured interviews and 12 in-depth interviews with different type of participation of each case selected. 2 online questionnaires, 8 online focus group, 15 observation, and 2 surveys. We also elaborate an explorative analysis on the emergence of value linked to culture in 4 fundamental arenas that identified in the UNCHARTED project: cultural participation in arts and culture, cultural participation through media, production and heritage management, and administration. In the framework of this work package, we organized the first workshop of the project in Porto in September of 2021. The workshop counted with the presence of the advisory board member, all the partners and relevant stakeholders recruited in the various fields of studies. The workshop also served us to clarify the field of tension and dissonance between the different values cultural detected. And after the workshop, the consortium produced a synthetic document which shows the existing diversity of the social value of culture, shows a complete cartography of agents, speeches, representation, resources, and practices evoking the different values of culture in Europe. This cartography identifies axes of convergence and dissonance in a map of tension in the evaluation of culture in Europe. Finally, in Work Package 3, we are now in Work Package 3, ending the Work Package 3. We expected to produce a general view of the conflicted dynamic of valuation in the cultural sphere as a whole. Now we are entering a crucial phase of this Work Package. In the case selection phase, we develop a shared standard template elaborated by the UNIVO to aim to present each case study in specific features and a rationale for including the Work Package 3. We select a total of 14 case studies, 4 cases studied to analyze the grammars of valuation and evaluation in cultural practice and consumption, 6 case studies to analyze technologies of evaluation in cultural production and heritage management, 4 case studies to analyze the influence of public administration evaluation methodologies on cultural production and heritage management, and 4 case studies to analyze the representation of cultural values in cultural information system. A crucial step in the developing of Work Package 3 has been the production of interim reports and submitted at the end of May of 2022, and the final report submitted early in November. We sought to understand the tension related to how different actors in the cultural field, citizens, professionals, public administrations, construct, measure, compare, and rank the values they attribute to culture. Finally, through the first part, it's our analytical part of the project, we develop a general vision. We try to develop a general vision of the configuration of value of culture in different areas of the cultural sphere, and in-depth analysis of their conflictual dynamics. Thank you, and I give the floor to Nancy to explain the first area, the first axis related to cultural consumption and cultural participation.
Thank you. And now, this one? Okay. Thank you. I'm here to give a brief first overview of some of the key themes that struck us about cultural participation that came out of all of the work packages to date, and particularly the case studies. Having said that, we identified 14 of the 26 case studies that directly related with participation. And so I'm very conscious that this is a partial representation of all of the richness of those cases. So of course, I invite all of my colleagues in the Uncharted project to participate in the questions and answers later on, as your case studies may not be entirely represented here. And I want to thank the SUDGE team in Coimbra who helped immensely with putting this together and pulling this together. And we thought we'd give you photos, nice colorful ones on a gray day. So in looking back, thinking about what is participation, and I'm not defining it here, but we identified a wide range of types of cultural participation, which has been made explicit by focusing on different actors and different contexts and different situations throughout the cultural field, including interviews, for instance, with citizens, professionals, and public administrators, as has just been explained. By uncovering more engaged types of cultural participation, we found that the very notion of cultural consumption, which was one of the topics to look at, it was placed at a crossroads involving not only consuming or purchasing of cultural activities or cultural products, but involving also decision-making influence of participants within their organizations, and a really heavily engaged investment of time and energies and self in this participation. Coming out of that, we found as well that grassroots engagement of this type can have an impact on the formal aspects of these organizations, such as the institutional vision, objectives, and partnership protocols. Turning briefly to work package 1, which was described, and of course there's more than this one influence, but the more tightly connected topic with participation was this influence of gender and rising diversity in changing and shaping cultural values. We have found that these two elements have been highly influential in changing and shaping values in society, modifying how participation is perceived and fostered. This has underlined and influenced a fundamental shift in cultural policy in recent decades from cultural democratization towards cultural democracy. Cultural democracy, this is just one of the definitions that are out there, promotes participation in a wide diversity of artistic and cultural expressions without a hierarchical order imposed a priori. Cultural democracy also implies questioning who is translating value principles into cultural programs. And we took this forward in how we framed this presentation. Going forward to work package 2 very quickly, we looked at the emergence of values in cultural participation and engagement, and this was identifying what types of values emerged in conversations with participants in different situations. This is actually a summary of an even longer list of values that were articulated. In order to help us grasp it, we started to look at how to organize it in some way. I'm not going to go into detail, of course, but looking at this the personal scope, the social or the external scope, and also values linked to larger societal and political desires and ambitions. And so, staying with work package 2, these tensions, and we looked at the tensions and relations between these three frames of social valuation. Again, this internal was about expressing values linked tightly to oneself, one's personal identity, one's personal aspirations. The external looked more about how values were linked to the group involved, the social dynamics of cultural activity, which made it meaningful. And the contextual, the larger vision, was about values expressed for society or doing something for this broader good at a larger scale. We found this dynamic that there wasn't a tension like there might be in the other areas, but more of a coexistence, a dynamic coexistence of different values which aligns, we think, with this democratic vision explained earlier of the social value of culture. And there's a rich ambivalence between these different conceptions of values. We also believe that highlighting the self-determination of values by individual participants and collectives also reinforces this plurality of values and experiences. Moving forward, so work package 2 was about identifying, at least from the perspective of participation, identifying these values, whereas work package 3 was looking more at the narratives and how they're connected and what influenced these values and how they came to be. And we looked at dynamics, particularly of individual evaluation in practice. But this is, of course, one snapshot of this broader 14 cases dealing with participation. We found that cultural participants managed a non-conflictual plurality of values: social, aesthetic, identity, political, etc. There wasn't this, there might be tensions, but there wasn't the outgoing conflict that you might find in other situations. And we found that economic value was relatively external for them. It was not appearing, economic traits such as prices and that sort of thing was not appearing to people as values, but as a means at the service of other values. They were participating in culture for reasons of relationship and expression and aesthetic related values, not for economic reasons. Individual valuation processes were organic, fluid, dynamic, changing over time. There was no a priori formality or rational elaboration in many cases, and that it was in the conversation that these values became explicit. And so we saw evaluation in practice as a spontaneous mobilization of a heterogeneous mix of value principles by individuals, determined in each specific cultural experience by the meeting of three variables or three poles. You've seen the triangles on the posters out there. The individual habitus, the social trajectories of the individuals themselves, the intrinsic content, what they are actually doing and participating in the cultural practice, and the context of practice, the various influences, the time and space of where and when they are conducting this work. And this is the last slide. I'm not sure what my timing is. Continuing on with work package 3 and looking at valuation dynamics, and this is a snapshot of one of other cases, but of course I'm realizing now all of the other things that could be added. And the question was how to that we took was how to translate democratizing principles as were identified in work package 1 and all this work into cultural programs. And so some of the cases looked particularly at the participation of underrepresented groups in heritage institutions, which constituted a cultural challenge for our society today. And it was examined through an analysis of technologies of evaluation. And you might hear some about that in from other perspectives. And this focused on the levels of formality. That was found that variables such as low economic stakes and limited accountability were directly conditioning a looser technology of evaluation design of these participatory activities, which indirectly enabled internal discussions about citizen participation and more open organizational arrangements. So when the stakes weren't tightly linked to policy, objectives and high economic stakes, you have these internal discussions among participants about their valuing and their inclusion and their participation, whereas in higher formality situations, it seemed to cover the plurality of values and tensions, whereas these informal evaluation techniques tend to highlight the value tensions, underlying participation, and enabled citizens to become more aware of conflicting and aspects of their participation. Thank you. That's it.
Yes, Nancy, thank you for this presentation. It's really, for me, a very big privilege to be here today as coordinator of the sister project Invent, and also to see, I have already been following some of the work done in the project, but now many things come together today at the poster session, at these presentations. And it strikes me that there are many, of course, many connections, many joint interests between this project and our project. which is of course logical given the fact that we are part of the same European call. But there are also, I guess, differences. But I really, hearing already the introduction by Arturo and the presentation by the other colleague from the project, and you, I think there's really a need also to put all the results and findings in some way together and draw some comparisons. For me, it's difficult to. I have some questions actually. Hearing the presentation, it's a very short presentation, so. I presume that I like very much the mapping you did, the value configuration, the internal personal, external social, and contextual political, the vision. This is all based on the 14 case studies you mentioned, and yes, yeah, maybe you can respond, because for me I only have those slides.
Okay, sorry. The overall review was based on the 14 case studies. That value table was based on four that were particularly part of the participation theme of Work Package 2.
So you have done this in different countries, but not in all the countries of the project, but in different countries, because that's one thing which is also part of this project, I suppose, and of ours project as well. We do these studies in different countries. We're also very much interested in, do we find these kind of configurations in a similar way? Are the tensions different in different contexts at the country level or at the local level, at the regional level? That would also be of interest for our project. We have tried in our project to also see these kind of values that people attach to their activities, to participation. We investigated a very wide range of cultural practices, from the traditional practices going to the theater or the museum, but also more everyday cultural activities as well. And we asked people who engaged in these practices what they get out of it, you could call it, if you use the media and communication literature, what are the uses and gratifications they get from doing these activities. So that's one level you can look at. That's also, of course, individual level. Most of the data we gathered are individual level data, but they can, of course, tell you something about the wider context as well. We are also interested, and I was wondering if this is also part of your project, in not just what the values they attach to what they do in terms of cultural practices, but also how cultural participation or cultural consumption, being engaged with creative practices, how this may actually also have an impact on people's value orientations. Because, we find some evidence in our research. Of course, it's all tricky because, causal relationships are difficult to establish. But we find some evidence that participation in cultural activities does also something in terms of value orientation that for instance, that it makes people more open to diversity in their environment, which would be an important outcome and also a reason to indeed stimulate more cultural activities. So this is one example. We also find evidence that values in the cultural field, values regarding culture, are kind of systematically connected with values in the political field as well. So this is also an interesting finding, I think, because it also brings us from the individual level to the more meso or macro level. So I was wondering, because it's more like, I don't have really like criticisms or anything. It's more like it makes me very curious to learn more actually about your research. What you did in 3, you mentioned this is indeed, we also find the participation of underrepresented groups in cultural institutions, museums and other heritage institutions, for instance, or theaters. This is also something we are studying, actually have been studying in the recent part of our project, doing some case studies in each country, We do 3 case studies, so we have 27 case studies where we particularly look at participatory practices in the cultural field and how they play out in different countries, in different parts of the cultural field. So, and that's really one of the most exciting parts of the study. We had a big survey, also exciting if you are into survey data. But this is even nicer because here you indeed get in touch with people who are working in the cultural sector, who are struggling actually with making access for all, for everyone, happening. And it's also clear, at least from our, of course there are good practices and things that work well, but there's also still a lot to improve. And it's not easy because we learn, for instance, I'm not sure if you encountered this as well, that by changing changing the game in certain institutions, they attract new audiences, but they push away other audiences. And they struggle with that. They are afraid that they want to provide access for everyone and engage all social groups in the neighborhood or in the city or wherever they are, what their audience reach is. But how to do this in a way that everybody indeed feels included, and that's there's not an easy recipe for this. And actually they look at us, this kind of project, to provide some solutions. So I think this will be a challenge, and I think the 3 projects together, I think if we indeed work together on this, we might be able to come up with maybe indeed very good policy recommendations at different levels, not only at EU level, but I think we also have a lot to offer when it comes to the more local level in the countries we studied. I think I leave it at this. Maybe you want to respond briefly, or I don't know, or I should maybe give the floor to someone else.
I'm just thinking about logistics.
Yes.
We're a little bit over time.
Okay. Sorry.
And we did have a 10-minute question and answer built in now. Arturo, do we want to do that, or do we want to go straight to Pablo?
Oh, that's great. Yes. So I hand over the mic to.
Well, no, I think that it could be good to have some time to speak in particular about this area.
I'm going to keep 10-minute time, and I'll call the end of 10-minute time. We have a roving mic, which Oliver's going to handle. So the camera can't hear me speak. So if you have a question, make sure you wait for the roving mic. So take it away, Arturo.
Perfect. So I invite everybody to intervene about this. I don't know if other questions or yes, please.
Many thanks. Patrycja Kaszyńska, University of the Arts, London. It's nice to see you again. And I have a question about the analytical apparatus that was represented on the diagram. What I was struck by is the presence of the micro and macro and the absence of the meso or mezzo, if you like. So the question is, given that social sciences that are not economics can uniquely claim to tap into the collective socially constructed value of cultural engagement, why is that not more pronounced in your setup? Is that intentional or not?
Well, I can make a brief comment on this, but other members of the group can have their view on that. In my view, is not a position, a very specific position of the project to avoid this meso level. If you, in fact, our concentration on the context of practice is a concentration meso level. It's not individuals, isolated individuals, but within organizations, within contexts of collective contexts. So that's my I answered that. Other comments?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me, and thank you for this event. It's very interesting for me. I'm Gábor Eres, the invited stakeholder from Hungary. I'm both a sociologist and a decision maker as a vice mayor in that Budapest district that your colleagues come from or work on. Also, so I may, if I may, make two short comments. I must tell you, I have a bias because I work with and on schools, both as a sociologist and as a deputy mayor. And my first comment or question would be, to what extent do you work with or on schools? Because schools, as we consider the cultural participation of children in particular, but not only, children grow and then become adults. School is the where socialization to culture takes place. So how do you work on this matter? That would be my first question. And the other question is, well, yeah, as I said, as a sociologist, I wonder whether you integrate more precisely a sociological perspective into your project in terms of class differences, in terms of generational differences, in terms of differences between various regions within a country, in terms of different gender differences. So as you evaluate the value of culture, as you put it, do you also evaluate these values of culture, that multiplicity of values of culture, in terms of explaining variables such as gender, class, age, and so on? Thank you.
Well, one of the things, we do have schools. Do we want the schools people the Cultural Rucksack team to answer? Do you guys want to speak?
I can just make a short comment to the first part of the question. I represent Telemark Research Institute, and one of the cases we have studied is called Cultural Rucksack, which is a national program for integrating culture into every Norwegian pupil's school. And that's only one of the many case studies of this project, but it actually deals with that specific point that you ask about. And the main aim, of course, is to both give these children a cultural experience, but also potentially to educate them culturally in gaining more interest in cultural participation as they grow older. So in that way, that's integrated in the project.
Yeah, more in general, I would say that, in fact, our methodology was not designed for systematically analyze the variables in the sense that you mentioned, but in different ways we certainly selected cases in order to cover the diversity of situations, and this includes certainly, and we have considered that those aspects, these issues, these aspects like class or gender or age, etc. So there are some cases that have been focused on specific people that are particularly in a category, but we haven't done this general analysis, because this general analysis in terms of variables. Yeah, that's.
One last question, I think, in the back, and then there'll be plenty more time for discussion. For this moment.
Hello, I'm also invited stakeholder from Portugal. I'm a part of an association of performing arts groups and professionals, and I have a question about the group of cultural products. So you divide these three groups: cultural participation, cultural production, and administration. And I want to ask if when you're analyzing the values in cultural production, if you have any division between like venues or other institution directors and the artists, or the more productive part of cultural production, because I think there are big value tensions between these two different parts of cultural participation. And when we see in heritage, heritage management, it's more clear. And I think it would be very useful if you subdivide this group between these two kind of social actors.
Of course, in fact, we have contemplated these different parts of in those organizations. But this, I think, it's better. It fits better in the next presentation, and I think it could be a good time to move on that in connection with your question. So, Paolo, if you want to take the floor.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I will provide a 10 minutes long answer to your question. So I'm Paolo Fedi, University of Bologna, and I will talk about cultural production and heritage management, summarizing somehow the work we did from WP2 to WP3. So starting from WP2, so previously on WP2. We analyzed 6 cases, so a festival, a museum, the conservation of a castle, architects, editors, and an exhibition, looking basically at what values emerge in these diverse cultural productions. What emerged is actually a highly complex and I would say crowded value arena. So you have people talking about authenticity, then democratic participation, economic value, well-being, and I would say that cultural production, heritage management are somehow even more complex in terms of values involved than participation and public administration, as you will probably hear lately. So a complex and crowded value arena. What we did in WP2 was to try to make sense of this complexity. So how comes that there are so many values? And this was partially presented in Port already. So what we did was what we highlighted is that when people involved in cultural production and heritage management talk about values at different levels. That is, let's take for instance, I think there is a pointer here, great. This is a festival, a busking festival in Ferrara in Italy, where we talk to musicians or to the audience, what they evaluated are the performance, and they talk about quality entertainment. On the other hand, when talking to the organizers, what they value is the openness of the program. So the fact that you have different performing arts, the fact that you have audience coming from different regions in Italy, and so on and so forth. Eventually, when we talked to public administrators, what they valued was the economic impact. So by applying this rationale consistently, we highlighted that a first level of valuation concerns the product or the experience. And here you have values like quality entertainment, comfort, newness, and so on and so forth. Another level of valuation relates to the container of these products or these activities, maybe the museum or the festival or the company. So here people are attaching values to organization, which I would say is probably the meso level Patricia was asking about earlier. If we move on, we have values relating to society. So what is the impact on the environment? What is the impact on the economic development of an area? What is the impact on national identity, for instance? So here you can see that valuations happens at different levels: product, organization, and society. Different actors associate different values. So audience and artists mainly associate values at the product level. Organizational actors are mainly involved in valuations at the organizational level, and public administrations mainly at the society level. What is interesting and what links us to Work Package 3 is that production management, and heritage management is in the between. So there are values relating to organization, but they also have to take care of, sorry, I keep on turning because I don't have my slides here. They also have to deal with values originated at the product level, so from below, and with pressures from above. What is interesting is what happens when different levels encounter. So between product level and organizational level, and between organization and society. That's why our Work Package 3 case studies try to focus on those overlapping, let's say, MUDEC and RRR case studies. Just trust me, you have seen the posters, so you have to trust me here. So here the main challenge is, a museum dealing with migrants in the case of MUDEC, or a museum dealing with young audience in the case of RRR. So the interstitial place is the one between participation and production. Venice and Liverpool, two UNESCO sites. So here the main challenge is between heritage managers and, let's say, an international level administration such as UNESCO. The last two cases, design and architecture, look into both interstitial spaces. So this is our analytical approach. So we work case by case, then we compare them into pairs, and eventually we try to find out some higher level abstraction. What's the result of this process? Four main propositions. What we did here was to look mainly at technologies of valuations, that is, not just at what kind of values people attach to cultural production and heritage management, but how they assess. So the kind of instruments they use. This is interesting because when you look at instruments, you have to find a solution. That is, you look at a technology like a ranking, at a certain point you will have to say, this is better than the other. So you have to solve the tension or to mitigate it somehow. And by looking systematically at different technologies or practices of evaluations, we try to spell out four main propositions. The first one concerns how evaluation technologies make tensions visible. There are cases like the RRR case where there is a lot of measurement, quantitative measurement, but tensions are not made visible, do not emerge. Why? Well, because measurement is done basically to show that everything is fine so they can get funding the next time. And that's a very, say, instrumental way of using measurement. On the other hand, we encountered less predefined or less structured evaluation technologies where tensions were allowed to emerge. As an example, in the Venice case, UNESCO is assessing authenticity and integrity, and there are no measures for that. So there is discussion about what it means, and then tensions emerge. when tensions are allowed to surface, they can be structured in two different ways, either through polarization or integration. So there are cases like Liverpool or Venice. Let me focus on Liverpool. Liverpool case, you have seen it in the posters. The tension is polarized. So you have economic development versus preservation. So a strong polarization. In Venice, you have cultural diplomacy. Well, we don't want Venice in the list, heritage in the endangered list. Versus, well, you know, maybe it would help to have Venice there because it would raise attention. So a polarization of perspectives. The other approach is integration. That is when actors work out, you know, they work on the poles of the tension and they found somehow a way to integrate it. We saw it in the Munich case, for instance. There was initially a confrontation between, you know, having many grassroots organizations participating and making this process manageable. So how do you deal with that? So you have many people, but that becomes unmanageable. How was that solved? Well, basically by making experts participate. So that make the participation process manageable. So that's how the tension was solved. So again, polarization versus integration. So how are these tensions solved eventually? Well, when there is polarization, you have only a temporary solution. That is in Venice, for instance. What is the solution? Well, Venice is not in the heritage, in the list of heritage in danger. That's a solution eventually, but it's only temporary. The tension between the exploitment of the city and its preservation is still there, and it will resurface. On the other hand, when you have integration, you find somehow a solution, and this solution will lead to new tensions in the future. So again, with polarization, you have a temporary solution, and then the same tension will arise all over again. When you have integration, you solve tension A, but sooner or later a tension B, a different tension, will emerge in a sort of more fluid process. Wow, this is long, and I will try to make it shorter. So we found out that power balances make a difference. So how much power actors have in these processes make a lot of difference in understanding how the tension dynamics. Polarization emerges where there are high power imbalances. You have heritage professionals in Venice versus versus the Ministry of Culture in Italy. Well, it's clear there is a huge power imbalance there, leading to polarization. That then leads to only temporary solution, and then leads with seeing that same tension over and over again. Integration is more common when power is evenly distributed. And that happened in the Munich example, where you had museums professionals working with experts about migratory processes. So you have all people at the same level, and they could work out a common understanding of how to perform participation. So to summarize, I mean, this is a highly complex domain. As you have seen from the cases presented, you have museums, you have cities, you have designers. Very difficult to make sense of it, probably impossible. That's why our main focus is on trying to understand complexity and trying to understand diversity rather than finding out similarities, because again, we are comparing very different things. So let's say that these 4 propositions are really about understanding diversity. Why are things, our processes, our evaluation technologies so diverse in the production and heritage management domain? Thank you very much for your attention. I think there is a...
Well, Well, thank you very much, Paulo, and thank you for inviting me here today. It's a real privilege to share this meeting with all of you. I will try to be brief, just to break the ice. I would like to open up the discussion with a concrete question from a heritage management point of view. Okay, regarding complexity, I will try to go to the very concrete aspect of it. Trying to put these conceptual frameworks into practice in an operational middle ground or meso level located between cultural policies plus administration that guide different, often stressed evaluative criteria and practices. I understand that this area is what corresponds to the organization, production, management axis. Well, I would like to say that in the day-to-day activity in heritage management institutions, as the museum where I work, I think that there is a lack of operational frameworks or guidelines, or maybe it's more useful to talk about operationalization models and resources for their achievement and consensus within organizations. I mean, I will try to translate it, how to land and make feasible challenges as authenticity, diversity, sustainability, or participation of underrepresented groups in heritage institutions. Perhaps paying more attention to this issue could help to redirect tensions and maybe to mitigate polarizations. And I wonder if you could develop this question related to operationalization and middle ground level and its evaluation, and if you could share specific cases from your research. Yeah. That's a challenge, I know.
Well, let's say, how can I deal with this? I think our main idea was to deal with technologies of evaluations. There was an expectation, we expected to find technologies, maybe that is formalized system to assess things. But actually that happened only in one case out of 6, that is the triple R case, where there are full rank of measures. It's not a coincidence that that case is located in the UK, where there is a sort of high attention to value of money, so to calculate impact and so on and so forth, while in the Italian cases that's totally absent. So rather than looking at, you were talking about operationalization, we use the word practices. So there we didn't encounter technologies like highly structured technologies, but way of doing things, and highly diverse, but not that structured as we expected. Or in other words, they were highly structured in the UK example, less structured in other cases. Let's say the positive aspect of having less structured operationalization is that those less structured operationalizations allowed tensions to emerge. So you had this kind of fluid situations where there is a tension, then a solution, then another tension. So it's more fluid and more in progress. The more you structure, the more you block or you neutralize. So that's a sort of finding of our case. So we may think that more formalization is, well, that's also in, I teach accounting, so in management accounting you do have that kind of, the more you formalize, the better it is. But actually it happens that the more you formalize, the more you focus just on measures, and you forget the process, and you forget, and you lose opportunities to learn and to improve. So I would say if in your museum the system is not that structured, it may be a positive thing, if you still talk about what you do and what you are achieving.
Thank you. Okay. Other questions, other comments about this area? Oh, Patricia. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Paolo, for this presentation, which has indeed focused on the sweet spot of being in the middle. That answers my first question. But first, let me explain why I keep on insisting that this being in the middle is interesting. The meta level, this level, yeah. Okay, yeah. So basically, arguably, without you're outside of the purview of economists. You can break down into individual willingness to pay, right? So you avoid methodological individualism on the one hand, the micro level. On the meta level, you cannot be a heavy-handed sociologist. You cannot work, with structures and functions. So you have to be a pragmatist in the middle. And that's nice because you see how the individual construct balance against collectives, right, at the society level. But how do you empirically study that? What's your methodology? I guess I'll stop here, yeah?
Well, methodologically, that meant, at least what he did consistently across case studies was to look at moment of evaluation. So we look at the call. Okay, how is a call structured? How are points associated to criteria? If there is a committee, how is the committee discussing and therefore assessing value? So I would say that's the answer, focusing on moments in which decisions are taken, through which tools, and I try to avoid the word technology, because as I said, we've only found one technology, let's say one purely technology. The others are like self-assessments or discussions in committees. So again, from a methodological point of view, you try to highlight evaluation moments, and you focus on those, and then you compare those evaluation moments consistently. Clearly it is different, it is difficult because, comparing what the World Heritage Committee does in Paris with what museum managers do in Milan in the Museum of Culture, well, it's different, it's challenging, but still it is informative. So I hope I answered to your question. So Luca, you ask a question and you provide the answer then, because Luca is from University of Bologna, so it's
I'm always provided answers. No, I try to help. I mean, these questions really address one of the main difficulties we have with this research, and particularly with Work Package 3 and the end of Work Package 3. So what is here, and I think it's very interesting and promising routes to study what is general, what we can generalize, which is the kind of tension, the managing of tension. That would be a paper on managing conflict, which is totally, when you have to make example, you have to change the level. You have to go back, not even to the topics in our structure, but to the pair comparisons within the report. So if you are not getting back to the level of pairs, it's empty in a sense. So we are able to generalize it in very abstract terms in terms of how you manage conflicts in different reality. I'm not sure this is exactly what let's say an actor of any of the case studies that we were looking at is interesting. If you were someone in Venice or in Liverpool, I'm not sure that a general discussion on managing conflict is what they are interested in. They were perhaps finding ideas, suggestions at the level of individual case study. I think this is one of the main difficulties we have, and we're still deciding. Yesterday, after the last beer, we were getting some point. But this is really with what we ourselves promised when we made that proposal. So in terms of generalization, but there's really the risk of making a generalization which kills the richness of empirical findings at the level of individual case or pairs of case. It's really the problem we have. So perhaps the questions could be addressed in different ways to different levels. And I guess we should be careful in making the final. We're still working on the last deliverable of Work Package 3, trying to go back to preserve the levels of relevance, which is the pair analysis.
So sorry, I'm Fred Ryan. I'm outside of the project. So there is a feedback. So this is without feedback. So it could be that my question is a bit. But I was thinking, how do you see the role of formalization by technology of these intermediacies and these frictions? So did you evaluate also whether that has an impact on how this polarization of integration is triggered, for example, by the use of social technologies of mediation, that could be interaction platforms also?
Well, with formalization, we mean how much a system is structured, usually through quantification. So if it is already predefined, what happens in moment A, moment B, moment C, and through which measures. On the other hand, by less formalized systems, we mean systems where you may have quantification, but then assessment is done through discussion. So with qualitative discussion. You can add if you want.
I meant something different, not really in the measurement, the assessment, but in the application of technologies to solve that kind of frictions. So these technologies are also players, I think, in the interactions. And my question was, did your research also reflect on that reality, that maybe social media, other participatory platforms that are deployed, for example, in citizen democracy solutions are having an effect in this matter?
Well, yeah, no, I got your point. No, the technology becomes an actor itself, making things happening. I guess the most crucial evidence of that is in the tripolar case, where the purpose of the technology is to neutralize tensions. So what it happens is that the more formalized the system is, the more tensions disappear. That doesn't mean that tensions are not there. Tensions are there, but the system is designed not to make them surface. In all other cases, technologies are less formal, and meaning that they do play a role in shaping, let's say, in shaping the discourse, in shaping the assessment, but they do not monopolize the discussion. So again, more formalization means neutralization of tensions and losing the opportunity to learn from divergences. Which again, probably going back to what Luca was suggesting earlier, it's relevant in one of the 6 cases. So again, very difficult to abstract. So that's true for the tripolar case. So there is, time is over.
Yes, I think we need to move to the next part, or to the last part of the session. Ole Marius will speak about cultural administration in our project.
Yeah, that's it. Thanks. Hello, everyone. Nice to be here. I'll try to synchronize my own slides with this one, so bear with me if my multitask is not up to speed. But nevertheless, I'll be saying something about the cultural administration part and saying something about selected results from the first 3 work packages. That means that this is the 3rd leg of the triangle that Arturo represented initially, dealing with how values are represented, negotiated, and operationalized in the administration side of the triangle. And I'll be trying to mention some of the brief results from the way the value complexity of culture affect the actual administration and policy as analyzed in these 3 first work packages. That means that my background for what I'm about to say is 3 specific reports from the project. The first one dealing with the European historical and political experience in acknowledging and promoting the values of culture from the first work package. The second one on mapping the values of culture and cultural policy objectives. And the third one on the influence of public administration evaluation methodologies on cultural production and heritage management. I should say that me and my team has only partially been part of the third report, so I apologize to my colleagues for misreading or misrepresenting or misinterpreting the results from the 2 other ones, but I'm sure you'll be able to answer questions regarding those afterwards. So, in other words, this has to do with first of all, cultural values in general as a context for and as part of the discourse of cultural administration and cultural policy. And secondly, as cultural values being present in the objectives and goals of actual and different cultural administrations. And thirdly, with these values as being operationalized through evaluation mechanisms of cultural administrations. So there is a neat logic in this, getting from the theoretical side through the political side to the very practical side in the different work packages. So I should say that the logic of the project is rather good, I must say. That's a compliment. So for the first report, how do European cultural policies attribute values to culture? And this starts with, and I quote from the report, an idea that there is an analysis to be done of a corpus of scientific articles, books and research reports, etc., to look at the numerous values identifiable in the history of cultural policies. That's a direct quote from the report. And what it also asks initially in this report is to say that there is, as we all know, a variety of perspectives on values being economic, sociological, political, and philosophical, and how do we actually reconcile those values? Some large questions being asked in the first part of this report. And they also have a couple of interesting theoretical quotes or perspectives being mentioned. The first one from Natalie Einik, saying that value is the principle from which acts and ideas and tangible and intangible goods can be measured, justified, and appreciated. Another point being quoted in the first part is that you can also see value as a part of a global framework for public action, which fits quite nicely into the way of looking at this from an administrative or political perspective as well. What the report states and ends up with or uses as a perspective is to identify 5 major families of values, being democracy, identity, well-being, aesthetics, and economy. It derives these values from a large catalogue of cultural values being illustrated in this way. It's probably not that easy to read, but as you know, this deliverable is publicly available as well, and you can go into it and look at how these values are both identified and illustrated in this. Furthermore, what is also used here is looking at these values as either or both or integrating well or being antagonistic. And it uses 3 different areas or case areas where these values are looked at. The first one being with the potentially incompatible values between cultural democracy and cultural democratization, often being part as in most national varieties of cultural policy. And the other one looking at the inherent value conflicts in the production and administration of heritage, in the sense that to define heritage and to assign value to heritage will often deal with a value conflict between diversity and nationalism, multiculturalism and monoculturalism, etc. And the third sector or the third case area illustrated in this report is the sustainable development as part of culture. And one of the points here is that sustainable development as a value can often be seen to integrate rather well with other values, for example, the value of cultural diversity. So for the second report and the second part of this, it was done 12 case studies of cultural administrations on different levels from these countries and regions and municipalities that is mentioned on this list. And what is referred to or identified in this report is that there is a number of shared values in the national administrations in these different countries and regions. First of all, that there is a common value sharing in the idea that cultural policy is institutionalized and that there is a need for public support identified to the cultural sector. And beneath this consensus, there is also a shared value of or manifestation of the importance of artistic excellence, diversity, national identity, culture as a citizenship rights, etc. But there is also the case that there is a differing emphasis and a differing positioning of values in these different places or administrations. And you also see that there is a common configuration of values as a mix between social and economic values, and a differing emphasis on one of them as the primary source of legitimacy for these different policies. So, summing up, this report identified these different value principles in national and regional administrations. And as you can see on the illustration, there is also an analysis of the frequency and importance of the different value principles I identified. And this is also followed up with a similar identification in the value principles of local administrations. And as you might see, there is a similar emphasis with some differences, but a very interesting difference I find is that in the local cases, you would find diversity almost or completely absent in the identification of values, while on the other hand, you would find the sustainability value as absent in the national and regional cases, which I think is a very interesting finding for this report. Okay, and for the last part of this, or the last report, this looked at public administration evaluation methodologies, looking specifically at the actual methodologies and looking at the influence on cultural actors and institutions from these methodologies. It was constructed through a division between two types of evaluation analyzed, or rather elaborated through the analysis, either as bureaucratic-led and as expert-led. And the bureaucratic-led evaluation in general was aiming at cultural institutions and heritage monitoring, while the experts-led evaluation was more aimed at cultural resources and status allocation. The cases for this report, the 3.8 deliverable, with these four on the top here. It was a case of urban cultural policies in Spain, looking at projects in Barcelona and Santiago. It was a case of monitoring Norwegian museums. It was a case of local grant making in Spain, also looking at Barcelona and Santiago. And there was a case of the cultural rucksack, just briefly mentioned some time ago. And this case, or this report, was also looking at two different kinds of influence, the direct and indirect influence of the actual cultural production and heritage management, and also from the very early beginning acknowledging that the contexts of these cases were very different. It was a case of different state-driven models and different traditions of cultural policies, which also was one of the most interesting parts in doing the work. And for the final slide here, we saw that the role of the evaluation methodologies in these cases was that, first of all, they did actually play a role in shaping the practice of cultural actors and institutions, but in rather different ways, both according or relating to the different contexts, but also relating to the different communication between the evaluators and those being evaluated. And also seeing that the different evaluation methodologies create a different legitimation and legitimacy structure as a consequence of different ways of evaluating. And thirdly and finally, also that the interpretation of and the interpreters, the intermediaries actually explaining or aiming to understand the evaluations had a central role in stabilizing tensions between different cultural values. So in short, these cultural values need rather... sorry. I forgot to push this button. Oh, that's too bad. But getting here. The cultural values need to be understood as a combination of an interplay between the principles and policies and practices, rather self-evidently, and the work in this work package, and the last one, strengthens our insight in this very basic fact. And that's the last slide. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much. I am Pau Rausé from the University of Valencia. I'm the coordinator of another sister project that is MESOC. I was asked to make a very informal intervention after the presentation about the point of the cultural administration. I have to say that as we are not so historian and sociologists, that we are economists and engineering people and so on, we are less interested in conflicts and in struggles, and we go straight to, well, we depart from the concept that there are some values that should be pursued by the European Union, and we read these values in the cultural agenda. So they say that cultural activities should produce, should produce social cohesion, civic engagement, urban renewal, and well-being, health, and so on. So we read that in the cultural agenda of the European Union, and we try to, from departing from this process, also we are in the next step. Departing from this process, we try to develop innovative way to measure that this effectively occurs or happens or not, and we can measure it in different levels, at micro level, at meso level, and at the macro level, as your approach in the same way. So we try how we can do that, and we prove some different methodologies. So, well, one methodology is, well, let's see what happens in all these reports and this academic literature and so on. But we try to do it, well, we know this literature, and we put in a kind of repository this literature, and we develop some kind of semantic searches. So if we want to have evidence about the impact of culture in health, then you can make a semantic search in this specific database that we have a repository in the project. But this was not enough. So you can do that in Scopus or in others. And we try to develop some tools for artificial intelligence. It's not to look for the point in the literature. So if we can develop some kind of new knowledge combining the existing database, so we develop a specific tool that is Serapeum, that is in the project, and now we invite you to use this to ask questions, specific questions to this. Is very now because we have GPT-3 chat, but it's a kind of GPT chat specific for culture. So we invite you to go to our specific part of the project and use this tool. We don't really know very well if the results are consistent or not, but we are at this moment. Is the moment to prove, to make some proof with the Serapeum tool. But of course, we go other ways and we ask, well, we ask experts and cultural managers and so on, because finally we want to measure. Why measure that? Because we want to develop tools to increase or to maximize these impacts, if we believe that these impacts occur. And then we ask through a Delphi, but with specific questions, which are the variables that could increase the social impact. Because we know that if culture occurs in somewhere, in some way, then finally we have impacts. But we know that to measure the final impacts is very difficult because it's long-term impacts. So we try to make research in what happens in the middle. So from the cultural experience, what happens between the cultural experience and the impacts. And we call it, what it happens in the middle, some kind of transitional variables. That means if we can measure what is changing in the middle, probably we can anticipate that the impacts will occur in the future. So we try to search for the transitional variable. That's a very not very clear concept. In fact, we still have a 1 year period of brainstorming, trying to understand and to share between the teams, the different teams, and with the different backgrounds and so on, what are these transitional variables. But finally we get some kind of convergent model. We call it convergent model because it was after this process of brainstorming. And which is the convergent model? The convergent models goes to the atom of the process, that is a cultural experience. What is a cultural? We define what is a cultural experience. I'm going not to go in deep with that, but this is the beginning. A cultural experience. And then we never mind how is the cultural experience is produced. That could be self-produced when one is writing poems at home. This is a cultural experience, or with when we share a travel or a history with in the family and so on. This is a cultural experience, but could be market produced or could be public produced by the public administration following some. But this is the beginning. What happens then? Then we try, well, at micro level, well, what impacts have on individual, this cultural experience, and we develop a platform, a survey platform, trying to discover that. This is the Culture platform that we combine, we ask people, well, so we have a model in the background that the cultural experience produce aesthetic impacts, cognitive impacts, emotional impacts, relational impacts, and we try and we ask with this platform from 1-0, we are economists, I'm sorry, we are not perfect. We ask from 0 to 1, which is the impact that to participate in this cultural event has produced on you. Independent, this is an exhibition, an artistic exhibition, a theater, or whatever, but always the same. And then we combine with this value that you is the economist, that is the willingness to pay. They're trying to convert these impacts in euros or in pounds, and to measure, because this is the beginning. Then we go a step further. This is at the meso level. That means that something changed in the market, in the policies, in the uses of spaces, in the networks, configuration of networks, and so on. And we try to see if there is possibility to measure these changes. That means we try to produce some kind of indicators that this cultural program provokes the increasing of the quality or the quantity of connections between people from culture and health. No, yes, yes, in a very gradual approach, we try to produce. This is very difficult because this is very specific for specific cultural productions or events, and so this is not easy. And we propose some indicators at this level, and then we have at the big level. So that means at the macro level that we know if it's possible to explain that the participation of cultural experience has impacts on health or in well-being, as the political documents says, then we should to measure that. And so we make a very big database, a panel database from the European region from 2008 to 2019, and we apply there. I don't understand very well because I am too old for that, but machine learning and causal forest and so on. And then we have for each region a kind of diagnosis that means that we can measure if you increase, because we use a proxy. Yes, sorry. We have a proxy that is people working in the cultural and creative sectors. That means that if we have more, we will produce more cultural experiences. It's a proxy, it's not a perfect measure, but it's a proxy. And then we can measure the impact on health. That means on health, on indicators, on life expectancy, or in political participation. And we have this database at this moment, and we have very impressive results, so we can make a diagnosis for each region and the effects of the increasing of 1% of people working on the cultural and creative sectors, which effect will have on income, well-being. That well-being means that the perception of life, the life satisfaction, civic participation, social cohesion, health, and so on. So sorry for that.
Comment regarding to the when Paolo mentioned the question of the level of formality in the evaluation technologies implemented in the case of the cultural production and heritage management, and this relationship with more formality, less tension, and less formality, more formality, the tension are explicit, and less formality, the tension are less explicit. But also we have to take into account the power imbalance between the actors that participate in the process of evaluation. This situation is another variable that we have to include to analyze the process of evaluation and to understand the type of conflict and tension that emerge after this evaluation. Just this small add to the comment.
Yeah, can you hear me as well? Hi everyone, I'm Neve. So I worked on the RRR project, and I just wanted to answer on the same question around like the formalised methods to mitigating the value tensions in this instance between participants. So this was young people in a project within museums. So like it's interesting to see about the types of bridges between these, because that was actually a lot of my role. So I was previously a participant. I started off just participating in these projects, and then I moved into a role of youth ambassador, which was created, a paid role to be part of the project team. And often kind of what my role involved was challenging and advocating for the youth-led voice and that value of actually participating, right through from consultation to really creative decision making, and ensuring that was happening in everything that we did. So I think a lot of my role was actually not a formalised evaluation method, but a formalised perspective on actually increasing that type of value, and specifically not just value tension, but also with what you've just said about the power structure there as well. Because obviously previously you're looking at a traditional relationship of an audience member coming into a cultural institution, whereas we wanted to move actually to our young people being active co-creators with institutions and with the various staff members that we were collaborating with. And how we actually kind of did that and thinking more about the process was specifically around the process of co-design. And if people are familiar with that, a lot of kind of what I was advocating for was, say, if a tension arose between, you know, the young participants want to give their perspective, and sorry, oh, I cut out there. If there was a tension between, for example, the creative agency of the young people and it being youth-led, and a value that was more related to the museum, so maybe like aesthetics or the ethics, or even in terms of kind of the accuracy of information. Often it was about, you know, bringing these tensions and these values together and sharing that expertise and that info. So instead of sort of saying, no, you've been overruled, that actually bringing these two opposing values and opposing parties together to share that information, and instead these values were informing each other, and that was like a process of mitigating that. But in terms of like actually doing that, that was a very much a dedicated role that required my resource. So it was a process of continuous evaluation, continuously challenging the power structures and any tensions when they arose. But like often that opened up really interesting creative opportunities, and young people were learning about these interesting areas and pushing themselves creatively. And you know, that was often where a lot of our most successful kind of projects came from. And you know, it increased our agency because there was that real recognition in the value of enhancing participation, and giving that agency to young people wielded better results, both for themselves as a participants on that personal level, you know, even what we talked about there about the personal, the societal, the group, but also for the institution, like the events and the exhibitions and everything that was being created was of a really high quality and achieved all these values. But like that was definitely a process that needed to be defined between both parties, and then dedicated resource, and very time intensive, and very much about having a role and a voice to you know, advocate for that. So that was my perspective as a participant, but my full-time role was to often, whenever this arose, create opportunities for discussion and actually facilitate that process by which the participants were enhancing their own voice and not being like shoehorned out by any kind of tensions. Yeah, but it was often sometimes the most interesting and creative process. Yeah.
Hello, it's a question about your methodology in MESOC. I didn't really understand. So how do you, how can you take in account the conditionality of impacts? Like, for instance, the sociological characteristics of individuals, like the way one cultural experience could affect differently different types of individuals. And how do you pass from this micro level to the global level? And also, I didn't really understand how you manipulate the price. Like, how do you use? I'm not an economist at all, so I'm totally ignorant of this kind of methodologies. But how do you use price to characterize an impact? And do you think it's really reliable? Because we could think that some impacts are totally disconnected from an economic or quantitative way of seeing life and values. So how do you consider that?
May I add something? Victoria?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes. I give you an example about your... it is absolutely fascinating to put in relation cultural experience and, for instance, political participation. I recall one experience. I was asked 6 years ago to see if cultural sustain from state and region at the municipal level had an influence on the fact that people vote less or more National Front. It was a very specific question. I tried. I hardly tried. And I abandoned. Why? Because the political behavior has a multiplicity of distinct factors of influence, and it was, for me, honestly, absolutely impossible to isolate, honestly, the cultural dimension of influence. More precisely, it was very easy to do it at individual level, but at aggregated level, at the municipal level, it was absolutely impossible. So how do you do?
And we did the answer, and then there's one more question here, but I think I'm going to hold it till after Arturo speaks. So answer, and then Arturo, and then the first question is already promised, and we'll have our general discussion. Okay?
No,
Sorry. Very, very quick. I don't want to monopolize. Well, this is a platform, so we get. It's used by the phone. We get information about age, sex, where they live, and so on. So we have a lot of indicators. So we use the socio-demographic context, of course. And the other question about is a very more or less used technique in economics. That is the contingent valuation. That means that we ask independently of how much have you paid for this cultural experience, that could be 0 or could be 90 euros, how much would you pay now that you know which are the impacts, now that you know which are the utility that produce you. There is a specific technique, a developed technique, that finally you convert the utility. You are trying to measure the utility of this in values in euros of this cultural experience, and then in the model that is background, we can measure if they are paying for emotional impacts, for aesthetic impacts, for relational impacts, but of course you need a big database of that, and at this moment we are around 800 results and so on. So this is not, we are prototyping this process, but we are developing the process. About the other question is with techniques, with causal forest now, is machine learning, artificial intelligence, and you can get in which place is in the model the cultural and creative activities, but of course, we know that these decisions are multifactorial, and there are other variables more important, but you can get the impact, the specific impact of the variation of the cultural and creative activities that could be the 10th variables affecting civic engagement. We measure not who are you voting, but the rate of participation in elections. So, but.
Well, no, I prefer not to speak now. I think it's much better to use the remaining time for more voices, more comments by you. I don't know if, for example, there are some advisors here of the project. If you have some reactions to these presentations and the other comments, or other people, as you want. Okay.
We have the first question here, and then we'll open to the floor, and definitely advisors would be great.
Thank you. Sarah Watley, Coventry University. I just wanted to pick up on a theme that I think has been emerging this morning around measurement. And I was interested in it appearing in the work package title, and then listening to the earlier discussions, it felt as if there was a really interesting kind of reconceptualization of measurement within the context of cultural values. And then we had something that felt much more closely around quantifying measurement. And I just wondered if from the sister project, whether or not there's a tension in there between something that feels like it's a little bit like a hostage to fortune, if we're going back to that kind of way of thinking about measuring, and whether or not there is a tension in there between the two projects that could be quite a productive tension. And if you have a view on that, thank you.
if I compare the two projects, I must admit that this is the first time I hear about this project. They complement quite well because what you are packing on and we are unpacking. So let's take with participation, for instance. You may have a variable for that, and when we did our case studies on the MUDEC case about cultural participation, we found out that there are shades of participation. I mean, participation in the interpretation of the collection is one meaning of participation. Then you have participation meaning involving many people, so one person for each ethnicity, for each ethnic group in the city of Milan. And then another meaning of participation is having subjectiveness involved in participation. So 3 different meanings of participation, which then may be contrasted with, one. I guess you probably are measuring things in a sort of unambiguous way, because that's what you do. And while on the one hand, we are making things more ambiguous. So it's going to be challenging for who is going to read the results of these projects to find some sort of integrations between them, although it may be possible somehow.
I'm a member of the UNCHARTED consortium, and listening at the conversation and the dialogue here, I think that there is something that is emerging and urging a comment from our research in UNCHARTED, which is the role of technology and data in the creation of values of a culture. Because we have looked at this topic marginally, I guess, in the project, while some of the questions that we received and the approach of MESOC is demonstrating that technology and data and the derivations from technology and data, the metaverso and the standards for the creation of the metaverso that are under discussion, create value. In a project where Fred and Sarah have been involved, and me too, we have observed as the bias in the representation of cultural heritage in digitization is creating values or is destroying values that were previously created. So there is this actor. Ole Marius said that there are 3 components in defining values. I think that there is a 4th factor, that is technology and data. And I observed, I read in the last days the proposal for the standardization of a metaverso coming from a group of technologies and promoted by Cariglione, who was the promoter of MPEG tens of years ago. And I noticed that in the case studies defining the standards for the metaverso, contributing to the definition of the standards for the metaverso, culture and cultural heritage are missing. So all the other aspects of the life of citizens are presented, but the culture and cultural heritage is neglected. So there is a question here. Culture, technologies, and data needs to get together. And I'm sorry, but I am an information scientist, so I am deviated in my capacity of understanding.
Francesco Molinari from the MESOC project. Since we were discussing about possible ways of converging, I have 3, 4, 5 proposals which I want to launch to your evaluation. First proposal, very, very quick because we don't have time. First proposal, Professor Rosell mentioned this How Culture platform. Practically speaking, we have a prototype which is ready to be used by other institutions. So suppose you represent or you know about a museum, a theater, policymaker wanting to measure the impact at the level of user experience of an event, an exhibition, whatever, we can provide to this museum, free of charge, all the needed infrastructure, set up the system in the appropriate language. We are now translating into Polish, just for your information. And so there can be a real-life test of this, completely free of charge. First proposal. Second way of interacting. I don't dare comment on the enormous amount of information and knowledge which I have gained this morning by the description of some of the use cases you have extensively and intensively analyzed. What I want to remind you about, it's also presented in our poster, is that we have built a collection of hundreds and hundreds, probably thousands, of academic and grey literature papers describing cases like yours. And there is a mechanism which is free of charge for uploading your case and getting in return the information of additional cases that may exist in our repository, the ways they are connected, the ways they point at societal impacts, because as Professor Rosell said, we didn't dare question the definition of impacts. We started from what was printed in the policy documents we started our analysis from. So this is a facility which is open, online, free of charge. The only thing is that you have to ask for the permission to access because it's still a prototype. So in return for your email, we are free to offer, again, in any language, because we have also solved the issue of automatically translating into English. Third way of cooperating, Arturo knows that we started about 1 year ago to discuss with our common project officer about the preparation of a joint policy paper. I have this experience from another Horizon 2020 project I was involved in. At that time there were 6 sister projects. We did a string of meetings and we converged on a text which was a policy brief prepared jointly with the contribution of all projects, presenting all the experiences, and then presented to the upper layers of the European Union. That could also be a possibility. Finally, we have, again, described on the poster the semantic search tool based on artificial intelligence, machine learning, and so on, described by Professor Rosell before. Now we are about to start a validation and testing round involving people who are really knowledgeable in the domain of culture, and we would like to invite all of you to join this panel, because now the need we have is to assess whether the new information which is discovered by the machine after fishing in the repository of documents is really good knowledge, or it's simply crap and therefore should be discarded and maybe taken as evidence that the technical persons involved didn't do a good job. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Kate Oakley from University of Glasgow. I'm one of the advisors, and I have to say that Luca over there has saved me a lot of work tomorrow in talking about the project that was described earlier about the case studies of different cities, etc. Because I felt he really nailed one of the points that I was going to make, which is that there's a flattening effect. There's so much material, but sometimes the way it describes flattens the issues, and the richness of the case studies gets lost, therefore, in a somewhat procedural seeming discussion of how decisions are made. And I think that's, as was described earlier, I think that misses out on the richness, but also it leads to a problem which I think I've probably maybe said before, but I think is lurking in this, which is an issue of normativity. I.e., what do we think should happen? What do we think is good? What do we think is more desirable or less desirable? What do we, those kind of questions, which if you're doing a project about values, it seems to me that ultimately you can't keep ducking them just by saying it's very complex. And I'll try and make make this slightly more concrete in a sense. So in the discussion of the two cities, Venice and Liverpool, and the UNESCO question, which I found really interesting. And I have to say that I'm from Liverpool, so this undoubtedly coloured my view of these particular case studies. But one of the issues that wasn't really raised in that very interesting discussion was the question of legitimacy. Who gets to speak for a city? It was written in some ways as if all the actors, UNESCO, the cultural heritage professionals, and the city councils, all had the same level of legitimacy. But clearly they don't. I mean, UNESCO has complete legitimacy deciding whether to give or take away, World Heritage status, but that's it. It has no legitimacy in deciding what is good for the people of Liverpool or the people of Venice. And it seems to me that without some level of grasping the issues themselves and having some kind of normative framework with which to talk about them, you kind of lose the richness and you slightly lose the meaning of the project. Thank you.
Hello, Ulrike Meinhof, one of the other advisors. I don't know whether it's a good or a bad thing. If the two advisors utterly agree on something, you probably would have liked to have more diversity in it. But I just completely underwrite this, and I also agree with Luca, and I'm going to say a lot more tomorrow, which I would have not needed to say if I'd already known what you're going to say today. But anyway, one of the things that really strike me here, and it's a very simplistic point, is that there are two ways of how people use your technologies, which are completely counterproductive. I mean, technologies in the sense that these that we're using here are really formalized value systems, and they are nothing to do with technology in the sense of artificial intelligence or machine products or any kind of interface. So in what came up and what Paolo was saying so beautifully is that when you're having highly qualitative, really in-depth, ambivalent, exciting data, which show how incredibly difficult it is to generalize on systems where individuals have diverse reactions depending on who they are, where they are, who they're interacting with, then to actually try to jump to a system which pops out at the other end, some kind of impact result, strikes me as completely counterproductive. And if I would want to say one big thing to the EU, is what already Luther said. You've got to look at what people say. You've got to look at a totally different level of conflict and tensions, because that's where the creative possibilities for the future are, and not immediately just want to have an impact level which abstracts from all these things, because it becomes very difficult to understand. And I had exactly that. I mean, had myself coordinated 3 or 4 different EU projects, and each time that was one of the outputs that I kept on stressing to the EU to say, if you want to know about cultural identity, if you want to know about how people feel about EU expansion, if you want to see how actual top-down economic impact monies are working in creating cohesion amongst people, it's pointless to talk, talk at the level of abstraction. What you've got to do is to see where the tensions really are. And this is what this project, I think, does really beautifully. So I'm very proud of UNCHARTED, that it has this kind of strength and courage to show that values are just not homogeneous, but they are cutting across.
Apologies, I'm not an advisor, but I am very talkative today. It's just because I think it's such a great project. But I want to speak to the loss of richness and maybe link to the point from Coventry about measurement, because I have started as someone, I guess, feeling that measurement and metric approaches were too much of a straitjacket. Now I feel I want to use it in a way that is not totally reductive, or at least to kind of keep track of what it is that I lose. And it's because for like decision making, you need to figure out some way of benchmarking and aggregating. That's why I keep on pressing the methodologies. It might be that there are other ways of doing it, but we currently really don't know how to do it differently. But on this topic, I want to say a few words about the limitations of economics and contingent evaluation specifically. So I have a misfortune or good fortune of leading a bit about that, and the contingent evaluation, like stated preference, willingness to pay, willingness to accept, are probably the only way we have at getting at non-use values that are very pronounced in cultural capital. The only problem is that from like environmental economics, we know how totally ridiculously overinflated they are, right? Like, I mean, this is hardly a reliable method. That's why probably triangulation would be useful of some kind. And in addition, now looking at you very much, transition indicators. I think it's something quite well established in design research. When people look at the various theories of change before they get to have impact, they quite comfortably set kind of ways of benchmarking whether they're getting there, right? So for instance, outcomes mapping is something that allows you to do that in a participatory way, just kind of throwing that in there because the project is so good. Thanks.
Hello, my name's Sylvia. I'm not part of the project, but I am part of ICE, so part of Goldsmiths. And I'm afraid I wasn't here for the last session, so I hope I'm not going to go over something that somebody's already addressed. I just wanted to bring up the issue of shared culture and shared value, because I think this is often the stumbling point. Any of you who were here yesterday would have heard on the news about new developments of the Parthenon sculptures here in the UK, and the decision that maybe the UK will allow the Parthenon sculptures to go back to Greece, but only on long loan because of a whole range of problems with deaccession of art objects in the UK. And I think we're always going to come up against the notion of culture as a culture that belongs to people. So are we talking about culture that is international culture? So the British Museum here will say, oh no, the Parthenon marbles have to stay here because they are seen by so many people and they're so well looked after, etc., etc. But there is no shared culture. And the more that we continue as museums along the path of recognising colonial and imperialism within the methodology of collecting the stuff that we have, we will come up against more and more this issue of what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do with all this stuff that we call cultural objects? This stuff that is not about people. It's not about individuals, it's not even about countries, it's about wealthy people who had the ability to go and get by whatever means stuff and bring it back to wherever and then display it under the guise that this is somehow internationally, culturally important. So I'm really interested in how a project like this can take into account what you are deciding is shared culture and what you are deciding is shared value.
Does anyone from the panel want to respond to any of this? And Gabor's waiting to get in, but I was just thinking that I really liked the idea of thinking about legitimacy and who has the right to be claiming. legitimacy, because one of the things that we're looking at in this project is tensions in values. And you get tensions when some people are making claims, but maybe they're not legitimate, or they have a different a basis for the legitimacy that they're claiming over whatever the source is. So, you know, the Liverpool City Council has a very different kind of legitimacy in Liverpool than UNESCO did, but they both have some kind of claim on what's going on for the various reasons. So I thought that was interesting, and also Sylvia's question about cultural objects and whose culture and how do we decide, because I think that also fits in with, so there's objects, but then there's also the values, and I think the values they can be encoded into written materials, but they're always enacted by how people are applying them or thinking about them or doing things. And so with the Parthenon marbles, for example, you know, there's the British Museum, or the traditional British Museum side, which is, no, the marbles need to stay here. There's the Greek national identity side about they were, you know, stolen. And there's lots of other kinds of ways that individuals might value those particular objects. They could be valued in economic terms and things like that. And that, I think that what we're trying to look at in the project is, where do those tensions come up, and what kinds of different values are enacted when we think about an issue like returning the Parthenon marbles, or you know, when we think about, I don't know, what does it mean that we have Turners in the National Gallery, things like that. Could create really interesting questions about cultural value. So does anybody else want to respond before I turn it over to Gabor for his question? And his might be the last one, because, in fact, it has to be a last one and it's got to be short. So Arturo, do you want to go? Because the thing is that we've got 8 minutes to lunch, and they're probably soggy sandwiches, but we don't want them to be even soggier sandwiches. So let me turn it to Gabor.
You fear that my question would be too long, or okay? Actually, it's a follow-up to what you just said. Yeah, those values are not only enacted, but they are also they are not things. They are symbols that points to something else. And I would like to raise the concept of identity. You mentioned it in part, but I think that from the beginning on, each and every single value is also, as we consume, consumption of cultural goods, it's always an act of identity. And as we mobilize identities, various identities, gender, age, class, etc., in cultural consumption practices, I want to join the previous discussion about cultural conflicts. I think to my understanding, the two main divides, the two main conflicts that were not that much talked about yet are first between, and it's more and more relevant, I think, and I'm not saying it because I'm a politician, but also as a sociologist. It's because it's between left and right. It's between liberal and conservative. So as a politician, as I do culture policies, I have to take into account the symbolic meaning, which is also an identity for those social groups, which is organized on the two sides of this left and right, or conservative liberal divide. And it's not only the case, it's obviously the case in Hungary, but it's not only the case in Hungary, it's also all around Europe. So maybe it's a relevant perspective. And the other divide, which is a fundamental one, is not between various forms of participations, but between participation and non-participation. So actually, progressive culture policy, as we try to do it, to implement it, is about making people participate, so awareness raising or involvement of vulnerable or marginalized groups such as the Roma or such as the disabled or such as the poor, the working class, the old people also, because they are vulnerable. They maybe cannot go out of their flat and go to a concert or an exhibition or whatever. So the main aim of a, that's my point of view, of a progressive cultural policy is to enhance participation in general. Just to give two examples, not to be too general, it's about an alternative Women's Day that we organized by the Community Participation Office, which is a new organism in the 8th district in Budapest that I'm a vice mayor of, organized. And it was, we don't want flowers for Women's Day. And then they made a call, and people responded in a way of, it was a plurality of ideas of programs and projects for Women's Day, such as bicycle ride with migrant women, so that migrants and non-migrants get to know each other, or an eco-feminist festival, and so on. And the other way to involve and to enhance participation, so to cancel that participation non-participation divide, is to put culture in the streets. So we organized, that's another thing that we did, concerts. We organized concerts in the streets. Those people, the working class, the poor, and so on, they don't go to concert halls, but they do go to concerts in the streets, especially when it's Roma music and not elite music such as jazz or classical music. So we organized concerts with popular music. So that's two.
Brilliant. Thank you for your comment. And one of the things I would say, and I'd like Arturo to just say thank you, and then we'll let everybody, I think, is ready for the break. But several of our projects looked at the kind of issues of participation, marginalized groups, immigrants, older people, things like that. So there's some really interesting stuff in the posters. And Arturo, do you want to have the last word before we go to lunch, or just say thank you if you want to?
Thank you. Thank you, of course, but something else. No, I think that the discussion has been very, very interesting and enriching for us, and the contrast between the projects has been also provocative, and is a good way for us to think on the other steps that we have ahead. I think that the project has as a particularity this decision to be close to the specific cases, specific realities, not to go immediately up to generalize, not to go immediately up to take a normative perspective, but I think that is part of a certain design of the project to keep the certain attention to this detail, to this specific context, and to tensions and to different levels of formality. And so in doing that, I think we already contribute, and we can say something relevant toward the level in which it is necessary to decide, it is necessary to measure, but to providing this perspective of the informality, of the tensions, etc., etc. At the same time, we also progress in this perspective of generalizing, but maybe, and that's also a possibility, not in a unique way, in a unique direction. We can think in different possibilities. So, well, I think the discussion has already provided many elements for us to progress in this line. So, thank you again.